ሰላም አድማጭ ተመልካቾቻችን ኢትዮ ፋክቶች ነን። ዛሬ ደግሞ ለየት ባለ በሌላ ቪዲዮ መጥተናል። ወዳችሁና ፈቅዳችሁ ስለምትመለከቱ በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ኢትዮ ፋክቶች ከዚህ በፊት እንደገለጽነው በኢትዮጵያ ጉዳይ ላይ የተለያዩ አመለካከቶችን ለማስተጋባት የሚያመች ነው የተዘጋጀ የዩቲዩብ ቻናል ነው። አብዛኞቻችን ወጣትን በብዛት ከቅርብ ጊዜ ወዲህ ባለው የኢትዮጵያ ፖለቲካ አንድም በሌላ ይሳተፍ ነበር። አሁን ግን አብዛኞቻችን እንደምናውቀው የኢትዮጵያ ፖለቲካ ብዙ ጊዜ እየተመራ ያለው በሶሻል ሚዲያ ላይ በሚካሄዱ የተለያዩ ንትርኮች ስለሆነ እኛም በድርሻችን የሚሰማን አካል ካለ ሀሳብ ለማዋጣት ፕላትፎርም ያዘጋጀነው። ሀሳባችን ለሌሎች እንዲደርስ ላይክ፣ ሼር፣ ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ እንድትወዳጁ በአክብሮት እንጠይቃለን። በዛሬ ቆይታችን ቻናሉ አዲስ እንደመሆኑ መጠን የተወሰኑ ቪዲዮዎችን ለማሳየት እጥራለሁ። ያው እንደምናውቀው የኢትዮጵያ ሁኔታ ቀደም ባሉ ጊዜያት የሚሆን አሁን ነገሮችን በትኩረት መጥፎችን ገጣጥሞ ላየ ሰው የሚሰጥ ፍንጭ እና እንደነዛ ያሉ ነገሮችን በደንብ በክሊር በሆነ መልኩ ሊያሳዩን ይችላሉ። አሁን አገራችን ያለችበትን ነባራዊ ሁኔታ እንዲሁ በአጭር ጊዜ ውስጥ የመጣ ሳይሆን ብዙ ዓመታትን 50 እና 100 ዓመታትን ያፈጀ ሁኔታ እንደሆነ ልንገነዘብ ይገባል። ስለዚህ ብዙ ጊዜ የኢትዮጵያን ፖለቲካ በምንመለከትበት ጊዜ የተለያዩ የዓለም ሁኔታዎችን ዓለም አቀፍ የሆኑ ሁኔታዎችን ማየት ያስፈልጋል እንጂ እንዲሁ በክልል ደረጃ ከዛም አልፎ በኢትዮጵያ ደረጃ ያሉ ነባራዊ ሁኔታዎችን ብቻ በመመልከት አሁን ያለውን የኢትዮጵያ ሁኔታ መገንዘብ በአግባቡ መረዳት ስለማይቻል ወጣ ብሎ ዓለም አቀፋዊ የሆኑ ሁኔታዎችን ማየት ያስፈልጋልና እነዛን ነገሮች በደንብ በተቀናጀ መልኩ ሊያሳዩ ይችላሉ። ያልኳችሁ ሁለት ቪዲዮዎችን አጋራችኋለሁ። እነዚህን ቪዲዮዎችን በይበልጥ ደግሞ ለማየት ከፈለጋችሁ ሊንኩንም ከታች ከዲስክሪፕሽን ቦክስ ላይ አስቀምጣለሁ። አብራችሁ እንድትቆዩ ጋብዛለሁ። በእነዚህ ሁለት ቪዲዮዎች በደንብ በግልጽ ማሳየት የምፈልገው አንደኛው የግሎባል ኢንተረስት በኢትዮጵያ ጋር ያለው ግሎባል ኢንተረስት እንዴት ነው የሚለውንና ሁለተኛ ደግሞ አሁን ሀገር ውስጥ ባለው ፖለቲካ የራሳችንን ሀገር እንመሰርታለን፣ ሀገር መሆን እንችላለን የሚሉ አስተሳሰቦች ከቅርብ ጊዜ 30 ዓመት ወይም በዚህ በ3 ዓመት ጊዜ ውስጥ የመጡ ሳይሆኑ ወደ ኋላ ታሪክን በምንመረምርበት ጊዜ 40፣ 50፣ 60 ዓመትን የፈጀ እንደሆነ አድማጮቻችን እንድታውቁ ይረዳሉ ያልኳቸውን ከዛው ከፖለቲካል አስተሳሰቦች ባለቤት ወይም አብረዋቸው ከነበሩ ሰዎች ላይ የተደረጉ ንግግሮችን አቀርባለሁ። በጥሞና እንድትከታተሉ ከዛ የሚቀርቡ ሀሳቦችን እንድትቀበሉና ለሌላው ኢትዮጵያዊና ኢትዮጵያን ይመለከተኛል ለሚል አካል ቪዲዮውን ሼር በማድረግ እንድትተባበሩ በአክብሮት እንጠይቃለን። እዚህ ጋር ግን በጣም ግልጽ ማድረግ የምፈልገው ያው እንደምታውቁት ዛሬ ላይ የኢንተርኔት ቴክኖሎጂ በተለይ የሶሻል ሚዲያ በዓለም ደረጃ በስፋት መዳረሱ አንድም በሌላ መልኩ ጥቅምም ጉዳት ይኖረዋል። በእኛ ሀገር ሁኔታ ትልቁ ጉዳቱ ያው እንደምናውቀው አሁን ሀገራችን እየመሩ ያሉ የፖለቲካ ባለድርሻ አካላት እንግዲህ አብዛኛው ጊዜያቸውን በሶሻል ሚዲያ ላይ ያጠፉት ሀገሪቱ በሶሻል ሚዲያ ላይ በሚራወጡ አመለካከቶችና አስተሳሰቦች ላይ የተመረኮዘ እስከሚመስል ድረስ ጥቂት የሆኑ ቀደም ባሉ ጊዜያት ይሁን በቅርብ ጊዜ በአንድም በሌላ መልኩ በኢትዮጵያ ፖለቲካ ውስጥ ባተረፉት ስም በሚዘወሩ አስተሳሰቦች ላይ ብቻ የተመረኮዘ ያም ደግሞ በሚዲያ ወይም በሶሻል ሚዲያ ደጋፊን በማብዛት ላይ የተመሰረተ እስኪመስለን ድረስ ነገሮችን እንዲህ በቃ እንደው እግርና እጅ ወደማይለይበት የፖለቲካ ሁኔታ ውስጥ አዘቅት ውስጥ ከቶናል። ይሄ አንደኛው በጣም አስከፊ ሁኔታው ሲሆን ሌላኛው ጠቀሜታው ግን እኔና እናንተን የመሰሉ በሀገራችን ሁኔታ ያለንን ሀሳብ ለማዋጣት እድሉን ከፍቷል። ያው እንደምታውቁት ከዚህ በፊት ጥቂት የሆኑ የፖለቲካ ሰዎች ብቻ ሀሳባቸውን የሚያራምዱ የሌላውን ሰው ሀሳብ የሌላውን አስተሳሰብ ወከሉም አልወከሉም አጋጣሚውን በሚያገኙበት ሰዓት የሌላውን ሀሳብ በዛ እንደሚስማማ አድርጎ በማቅረብ ጥቂት የሆኑ ፖለቲካ ተዋናኞች ሜዳ ውስጥ የሚጫወቱበት አብዛኛው ሰው ተመልካች የነበረበት የፖለቲካ ሁኔታ ነበረ። አሁን ግን ዓለም አቀፋዊ ሁኔታ የዚህ የቴክኖሎጂን ማደግ ሁሉም ሰው በቤቱ ቁጭ ብሎ ሀሳቡን የሚያስተላልፍበት እና ደግሞ እንደኛ ሀገር ባለው የመንግስት አሰራር አብዛኞቹ መሪዎቻችን ሶሻል ሚዲያ ላይ ቁጭ ብለው ጊዜያቸውን ስለሚያጠፉ በዚህ አጋጣሚ ሜቢ በለስ ቀንቶንኛም ሀሳባችን እነሱ ጋር ከደረሰ ቢያንስ ምልከታችንን አስተሳሰባችንን ሀገራችን ያለችበትን ሁኔታ የሚያሳየውን ነገር እነሱ ጋርም ደርሶ ለወደፊት ላሉ ነገሮች ላይ እንደው ሀሳባቸው የሚመለሱበትን ወይም ሀሳባችንን አዳምጠው መፍትሄ የሚሰጡበትን መንገድ በተወሰነ ይዞ መጥቷል። ያም አንድ ጥሩ ነው። ስለዚህ በዛ አግባብ ሀሳብ ለማዋጣት ነው በዚህ ላይ ሀሳባችን ሚዲያው አዲስ በመሆኑ አሁን ላይ የተለያዩ ቪዲዮዎችና አንዳንድ አዳዲስ ሀሳቦች ወደ እናንተ እናደርሳለን። ወደፊት ግን በተጠናከረ መልኩ የተለያዩ የፖለቲካ አስተሳሰብና አመለካከት ካላቸው ሰዎች ላይ የተለያዩ ውይይቶችና የተለያዩ ፕሮግራሞችን ወደ እናንተ ለማቅረብ እንሞክራለን። ለዛሬው በዚህ በመጀመሪያው ቪዲዮ ልጋብዛችሁ። ከዛ በኋላ ሁለተኛው ቪዲዮ በማስቀጠል አቀርባለሁ። አብራችሁ ትቆዩ በአክብሮት ጋብዛለሁ።
Ethiopia state media is reporting that the second phase of filling the controversial Grand Renaissance Dam is nearly complete. Now, the issue has raised tensions with its...
Where we are now is Sudan and Egypt have said, which we agree with, that Ethiopia should not fill the dam.
Joint military drills between Sudan and Egypt, dubbed the Guardians of the Nile, have raised concerns.
Donald Trump's next remarks suggested a new conflict in the Mideast Africa region.
It's a very dangerous situation because Egypt is not going to be able to live that way. and they'll end up blowing up the dam. And I said it, and I say it loud and clear. They'll blow up that dam, and they have to do something.
10 days after Trump made his statement, Tigray People Liberation Front attacked the Ethiopian Defense Force, marking the beginning of the bloody civil war. So far, this war has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced upwards of 3 million people, with an economic impact in billions. Khedive Ismail was the ruler of Egypt and conquered Sudan in 1863. His next plan was to conquer Ethiopia and make the Nile an Egyptian river. To realize his grand plan, Khedive Ismail hired American ex-Confederate and Union officers and soldiers. In 1870, with the recommendation of General William Sherman, the first combat troops and officers arrived in Cairo. In 1875, the Egyptian ruler Khedive launched an invasion of Ethiopia with an army led, in part, by American officers. The US trained and armed led Egyptian army annihilated and crashed in a series of battles in 1875 and 1876. William W. Loring published a memoir of his experience in the Ethiopian War. He was the chief of the Egyptian army expedition to Ethiopia. Loring's recollections of his time in Ethiopia provided a fascinating glimpse into the war. During the scramble for Africa, controlling the source of the Nile was a major colonial goal for the British. The 1929 Anglo-Egyptian Treaty is a bilateral treaty between Egypt and Britain. The Nile Water Treaties were agreements between the British on behalf of its East African colonies, Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. They effectively prevent Ethiopia from using the Nile's waters without the consent of those downstream countries. This resulted in a strong Egyptian bias, and these are the treaties Egypt wants to enforce today. In 1959, Egypt signed a treaty with Sudan that would give Egypt 2/3 of the Nile's water. In the 50s and 60s, both Egypt and Sudan built huge dams, pulling millions of their people out of the dark. Ethiopia was never consulted on either treaty, despite 85% of the River Nile originating in the highlands of Ethiopia. Egypt, with its extensive diplomatic connections and relationship with the United States, former USSR, Arab League, European Union, and international financial institutions, has managed to prevent the construction of any major infrastructure projects from the tributaries of the Nile for decades. Ethiopia was prevented in using its natural resource to address the widespread poverty and poor living standards of its citizens. Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie had a great aspiration in developing the Nile. A Bay Basin master plan was produced after 5 years of research.
ኢትዮጵያ የኃይል ምንጭ የሚሆኑ ብዙ ወንዞች በየስፍራው ሞልተዋታል። እነዚሁም ደረጃ በደረጃ በስራ ላይ ለማዋል እንዲቻል በሁለተኛው የ5 ዓመት ፕላን መሰረት ስራው ተጀምሯል። ጅምሩን ለማፋጠን ከሚጎድሉና አንዳንድ ለዚህ አይነት ስራ የሚሆኑ የተማሩ ሰዎች እጥረት ነው። ይህን ሁሉ አስቀድመን በመገንዘብ ነው ዋናው ጥረታችንና ኃይላችን ለትምህርት ጉዳይ ያዋል ነው። ሀብት በፈለገው አይነት ሊጠቀም የሚችለው የተፈለገው አይነት የራሱ ሰራተኞች ሲኖረውና ለዚህም ሁሉ የኢትዮጵያውያን መሐንዲሶችና ቴክኒሽያኖች በብዛት የሚገኙበት ጊዜ ሲሆን ነው። ይኸውም ሩቅ ነው አንደርስበትም ብለን.
Due to regional bickering over water rights, followed by a Marxist coup, Somalian invasion, a 3-decade bitter civil war, coupled with a devastating famine in the 1980s, has made it so difficult for Ethiopia to focus on its development. With its grip in the Arab League, the Egyptian government has had a long-standing policy of destabilizing Ethiopia since the 1940s, making sure Ethiopia stays in constant civil war and civil strife, preventing Ethiopia utilizing its natural resource. Many secessionist insurgents, including TPLF, were trained and armed by Egypt and Sudan. Per a CIA declassified report, TPLF was working in tandem with the expansionist government of Somalia. Somalia attacked Ethiopia in the late 1970s and seized a large swathe of Ethiopian territory. Ex-Foreign Minister Saim Mesfin Ismailized his name to get support from the Arab countries. Against all odds, the ex-Ethiopian military government launched an ambitious large-scale development project on 1 million hectares in the Nile Valley. This project comprises power generation, mechanized agriculture, forestation, livestock, fishery, and agro-industry. It was intended to change the life of millions of Ethiopians by ensuring food safety and security. Over 200,000 farmers were settled. Basic infrastructures were built, including water supplies, energy, communication, roads, bridges, houses, stores, airport, and hospitals. As the project progresses, Egypt and Sudan scaled up their support for rebel insurgents. Distracting the implementation of the project, guerrilla fighters including TPLF repeatedly attacked the development zone by going around Sudan. Foreign project consultants, engineers and technicians were kidnapped. Also many Ethiopians were killed.
The Ethiopian government troops out of two more provinces, Gondar and Gojam, and out of most of a third, the province of Velega.
When the mercenary Tigray People Liberation Front seized that area 4 years later, the entire development zone was dismantled. Bulldozers, excavators, tractors, different machineries, factories, cars, even water pipes were looted and taken to Tigray. the farmers settled in the development valley were left to extreme suffering and poverty. The mercenary TPLF fulfilled the mission of Sudan and Egypt successfully.
The United States government is recommending that the forces of the EPRDF enter the city as soon as possible.
The decision to let in the TPLF and occupy Addis Ababa and grab state power was tragic and inexplicable. How an ideologically intoxicated, ethnically narrowly based guerrilla force, as Francis Le Monde did say in this morning's editorial, headed by a radical Stalinist with no experience to raise and administer a family, let alone administer a country of 50 million people, should be asked to march in and assume state responsibility is beyond me to comprehend, and I ask for divine intervention.
An arrest warrant had been issued against the Sudanese president in March 2009. He is suspected of 5 counts of crimes against humanity, 2 counts of war and 3 counts of genocide allegedly committed in Darfur. However, al-Bashir has traveled dozens of times, including to Egypt, without arrest since the warrant was in place.
In darkness, 60% of Ethiopians do not have access to electricity, and those who have access to electricity is in a very small distribution, a very small power that goes to each house. And Ethiopia is really very much in need of developing the country, industrialization, urban development, and bringing electricity to rural cities and areas.
Ethiopia, with over 100 million people, produces only about as much electricity as the state of Indiana.
Well, as the name Renaissance suggests, this dam is supposed to revive Ethiopia's economy. It'll provide electricity to millions of Ethiopians. And that's big, because right now more than 2/3 of the population aren't connected to the grid. That's about 75 million people.
The dam will provide nearly a quarter of the country's energy needs, and even allow Ethiopia to sell power to its downstream neighboring countries. Sudan and Egypt desperately tried to stop the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam. Fair and equitable use of the River Nile has always been the policy of governments of Ethiopia. Egypt wants to maintain colonial treaties. Ethiopia has never been colonized and was not participated and consulted on any of those treaties. In 2013, Egyptian President Morsi was caught on an open mic discussing how to destabilize Ethiopia.
ووسائلنا الجادة جدا في الحفاظ على كل قطرة من النيل، قطرة واحدة. في هناك شعب الأورمو 95% 35% من سكان اثيوبيا ولديهم جبهة تحرير اسمها جبهة تحرير أورمو، لأن الجبهة الداخلية لأثيوبيا في منتهى الضعف، جبهة هشة. وكذلك جبهة تحرير الأوجاديل يمكن دعمهم، وتعتبر دي ورقة ضغط على الحكومة الإثيوبية. إذا فشلت كل هذه المحاولات فلا خيار أن احنا ممكن نستخدم آخر الأوراق عن طريق الاستعانة بالمخابرات لهدم أي سد يقام إذا كان فيه هزيمة البناء.
في اثيوبيا احنا محتاجين فريق عمل في اثيوبيا سياسي مخابراتي بكافة اشكال التعامل مع الواقع الاثيوبي، يجب ان يكون لنا دور فيه. واعتقد ان ده حجم الانفاق عليه اقل بكثير جدا مما سينفق في مجالات اخرى لتدارك الاخطار. احنا محتاجين نقيم اتصال وتأثير مباشر وتدخل في
احنا ما عندناش غير محور بتاع اريتريا، الصومال، جيبوتي، وده كله شغل مخابرات بقى. هم دول اللي يخلصوا من جوه، هم منهم في بعض يعني، وده بيحدث وده حقنا. مش لازم نروح مباشر، في 100 طريقه غير مباشره، ده لما نفقد الامل يعني.
الاجتماع مذاع
لو بيقول لي اجتماع مذاع على الهواء هو فانا ما عنديش خطه سريه ولا حاجه. يفصل انا ما عنديش خطه سريه، لكن اللي انا هقوله ده بتعمله كل الدول واتقال.
Ethiopia, all along, were asking for equitable share of the water.
GERD is actually a people's project. All walks of Ethiopians are contributing to build this dam to bring light home to 65 million people who are currently living in darkness. The Nile belongs to all peoples of the basin countries.
With US President, a close ally to Egypt's Abdel Fattah Sisi, he was asked to intervene.
Cairo and Khartoum have called for the United States, the United Nations and the European Union to help reach a legally binding deal.
Sudan and Egypt asked the United States to intervene, hoping it will render quick victories for both countries. Ethiopia was too reluctant to get involved, knowing Trump's bias to blacks or African countries.
Using vulgar language, President Trump today questioned why the United States would allow people from Haiti and Africa into the country, describing those places using an expletive while suggesting people from Norway might be more acceptable.
This round of negotiation flowing from a meeting between US President Donald Trump and his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, at which the US leader was asked for help in resolving the bitter dispute between the countries. President Trump has assigned his Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin to host the talks, an apparently curious decision to bypass State Department, which would traditionally handle such negotiations. But the inclusion at the meeting of World Bank President David Malpass, a clear signal that the Trump administration sees economic leverage, not diplomatic talk, as the key to agreement.
Ethiopia was heavily pressured to participate in trilateral negotiations led by the US. Soon after the negotiations started, the US started to put its thumb on the scale in favor of Egypt and Sudan. The US all of a sudden started to play the role of binding arbitrator, diverging from its role as observer alongside the World Bank. The American-led negotiation wrapped up without agreement, as Ethiopia no-shows.
Tried to mediate discussions between the three countries earlier this year, but Ethiopia walked away. They accused the U.S. of siding with Egypt. The U.S. is now reportedly cutting up to $130 million in aid to Ethiopia because of the dispute.
You have been part of the debate surrounding the agreement on the filling and operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam based on provisions proposed by the legal and technical teams of Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, and with the technical input of the World Bank. It's my understanding that the administration contends that we have a balanced approach on this issue, taking into account the interest of the three countries at the core of the conversation. However, there has been some discrepancy in reporting on the administration's announcement. Specifically, Ethiopia's foreign ministry stated that Ethiopia does not accept the characterization that the negotiation on the guidelines and rules on the first filling and annual operation of the GERD is completed. You know, Mr. Secretary, this is sensitive conversation and a critical negotiation that can impact the overall safety and security of the region. So my question is, what are you and the administration doing to counter the narrative that not all parties are happy in this agreement and to ensure that all parties are heard in the critical GERD debate? My primary question is, what are you doing to ensure that all parties feel that they are heard and that the United States is not imposing more so than having a balanced role?
Again, I'm sorry, I was just giving you a little bit of background.
I'm fully apprised of the project.
For 8 years, they've been arguing about this and made no progress. We made...
So what are we doing, I'm sorry, sir, to make sure that people feel that this is a balanced approach?
We've had over 10 meetings of all three teams here. Again, we've been trying to bring the parties together. They've made enormous progress. We were incredibly disappointed that Ethiopia didn't show up at for the last meeting. And where we are now is Sudan and Egypt have said, which we agree with, that Ethiopia should not fill the dam.
The Nile's basin spans across the countries of Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. Ethiopia always emphasizes the importance of an African-led arbitration. The dam dispute is an African issue, and so requires an African solution.
In March, Egypt's president said his country and Sudan are fully united on the need for limits.
We both had the same stand in rejecting attempts by Ethiopia to impose a Blue Nile fait accompli through Europe.
President El-Sisi later warns of, quote, instability that no one can imagine in case a single drop of water is taken from Egypt. A threat that war is not out of the question.
Military exercises by Egyptian and Sudanese forces. Egypt has also signed military cooperation pacts with Ethiopia's neighbors, Kenya and Djibouti.
Then Trump made this statement in the White House.
Dangerous situation because Egypt is not going to be able to live that way. And they'll end up blowing up the dam. And I said it and I say it loud and clear. They'll blow up that dam and they have to do something. They say they have a dam.
Trump preceded those words with actions. He ordered aid for Ethiopia to be stopped over its failure to respect a US brokered agreement with Egypt and Sudan over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
November the 4th, 2020.
ፕሪምፕቲቭ ስትራይክ ሁሉ መጠቀም አለብን።
ስለዚህ መብረቃዊ የሆነ እርምጃ መወሰድ ነበረበት። ያ መብረቃዊ እርምጃ ባይወሰድ ኖሮ ይሄን ጊዜ ትግራይ አሁን ቁጭ ብለን የምናወራበት አይደል።
To be fair, the initial attacks came from the TPLF onto federal military facilities.
So you're saying it's the TPLF that started it?
Yeah, the actual hostilities were started by the TPLF launching an attack a year ago on the headquarters of the Ethiopian Federal Army's Northern Command. The TPLF claims that they started the hostility.
Believing Egypt, Sudan, and the United States will force Ethiopia to capitulate with whatever means necessary. The mercenary rebel group, Tigray People Liberation Front, saw an opportunity, attacked the Ethiopian army, igniting the civil war. Ethiopia was stabbed in the back again. Within weeks, a concerted propaganda war started to flood the media. Western media machinery, intellectually dishonest academics, analysts, and unethical journalists waged vicious anti-Ethiopian propaganda.
The future of Ethiopia will for sure be very, very different to the past. That full stream of a revived empire will be buried for good. And members of the Tigray Defense Forces, you have won the respect of everybody. The doctrine of a just war has rarely had so clear an exemplar.
The Tigrayan people and TDF, and they're fighting not only for their own lives, they're fighting for the lives of their children and their parents and their collective security, which makes their fighting morale, I would say, probably quite higher than...
So you're saying that there are American citizens who are in Ethiopia right now who think that somehow there's going to be a U.S. military evacuation of Americans from Ethiopia.
I am saying we do not want there to be a misimpression that anything like what was under front row, but...
እንዳ ስጋ እንዳ ግዛዕት ሃልዩ ካብ ኢትዮጵያውያን ዝበሃል እንዳ ተካላት ናይ ንግዲ ከይትዕድጉ ጉልበት ገንዘብ ክትፈጥሩሎም ይኹም አይኮነን ከይውድኹም ብስሩን ገለእትዮም ናፍቲ ምግቢ ክልውድኹም ይኹሉ እዮም እዚኦም
እኔ ምኮራበት አንዱ ነገር የኔ ትውልድ ማለት ነው ኢትዮጵያ ስትፈርስ ቆሜ ማየቴ ነው
Sudan, taking advantage of the opportunity, occupied Ethiopian territory.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Ethiopia and Sudan are warning each other against worsening a historic border dispute.
And just yesterday they said these lands aren't Sudanese lands, but these are Sudanese lands, no matter what anyone says.
Ethiopia hasn't responded to the allegations, but its government is accusing Sudanese forces of pushing further into the region.
حقتنا نحن ذي السودانيين صحيح في فترة من الفترات ناس نفرطوا فيها لكن نحن تاني ما بنفرط فيها الله بنفرط فيها نحن برانا انتو بيكم انتو ديل بيكم انتو
Addis Ababa says security at the dam has been stepped up and the Air Force is actively protecting the airspace over it.
While the Ethiopian government was occupied with the military operation in its northern Tigray region, Sudan's army moved in to push back Ethiopian farmers in the area. The move has sparked border violence in the past week.
The Sudanese CNN journalist Nima sensational, factually incorrect and biased reports began to surface on CNN, influencing world opinions against Ethiopia. The Ethiopian flagship airline was not spared. Any material that served to weaken and disconfirm the Western media narrative would be ignored, discounted, excluded, even attacked.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Khan. US President Joe Biden signed an executive order threatening new sanctions against the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments.
Biden's executive order empowers the State Department and Treasury to be able to sanction those.
Emboldened by the support of Sudan, Egypt, the United States and the UN, the vengeful TPLF invaded Amara and Afar. The scale of devastation inflicted by the mercenary TPLF in Amara and Afar is incalculable. The rape spree and atrocities amount to genocide. War crimes were committed. 90% of the infrastructure included hospitals, schools, telecommunications, roads, power plants, were looted and intentionally destroyed. The nation was forced to divert its scarce sources into an unnecessary civil war. With the support of the US government, the TPLF almost took control of the capital. The grand plan of disintegrating Ethiopia was averted, but it was a close call.
Well, I do represent the government of Tigray at this moment.
I hope that you have military success fairly soon because
Thank you. Thank you very much.
With troops now right outside of Addis, as you know, the evacuations have begun. That's a very...
ኣሜሪካ እዮም ኣዲስ ኣበባ ተኣቲኹም ዝብል ነገር ዘሎ ገገለ ናይ ኣውሮፓ ዓድታት እውን ከምኡ ዓይነት ነገር የለ ግን ድማ ብውሽጢ ድማ እንታይ ይብሉ ኣዲስ ኣበባ ተኣቲኹምስ በይንኩም ኮይንኩም ሽግር ካብ ክፍጠር ተወሰነ ኣኪኹም ኣኻ
Several Ethiopian anti-government groups in Washington, D.C. have signed an agreement to form an alliance against...
9 opposition groups, including fighters loyal to the TPLF, recently formed a new alliance in Washington.
I talked to a wide range of people, mainly religious leaders of all stripes. And what I asked them over and over again was what U.S. people who are concerned about hunger in the Horn of Africa should be urging the U.S. government to do. And almost with one voice, these people said, you can help us reduce warfare. At the same time, I was able to talk to 6 or 8 U.S. government officials. And it became very clear to me that the Horn of Africa is not now a priority for the U.S. government. We're not innocent bystanders in this region. The U.S., the Soviets, the richer Arab countries have played strategic checkers on this region for 3 decades. But now the Soviets have gone home, they've got problems. The Arabs have gone home. The Soviets have dismantled their base in Addis, or in Ethiopia on the Red Sea. The U.S. has abandoned its facilities in Somalia, its military facilities. And so really our only interest there now is humanitarian. And what's clear is that that's not a very important interest for us. I talked with Ambassador Bob Hodek, who represents us in Addis. And one thing that he said to me really struck me. He said, the truth is that the end of the Cold War has devalued a lot of third world real estate. We just don't have to woo Somalia and Ethiopia anymore. In the case of Somalia, as late as 1988, the U.S. was giving more aid to that little country than any other country in Africa. But today, we find it too complicated. I talked to our political officer for Somalia, and he just said, well, it's just so complicated. The domestic politics are so complicated. We don't see how we can get involved. Why was it less complicated in 1988 when we were propping up the dictator that has now fallen and left the country in chaos? Why is it so complicated now when it's only human lives that are at stake?
The neo-colonial mentality of the West has to change. Ethiopia has never had any intention to hurt any country. It's all about fair and equitable use of the water. Ethiopia relies on rain-fed agriculture, which leaves millions of Ethiopians vulnerable to hunger. The self-financed Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will spark economic growth, investment, and enable massive industrialization in the entire East Africa. The bright future is ahead of us. We will not kneel down.
I am 15 years old. My home is in Addis Ababa. Italy wants to make war against my people. We are a peace-loving country and have much work to do here in Ethiopia without being troubled by foreign countries. We do not want war, but if we are attacked, we will fight to the last drop of our blood to protect our home. My father and brother will take me along when they go to war.
The problem to me is this is a very small group. When it was created in 1975, it never had any agenda for Ethiopia at all, never. We had to go through a struggle of about 5 or 10 years to convince these people that there is nothing like independence of Tigray. Tigray as a region could not be independent. One can have his own grandiose ideas about his own territory, his own particular region, but that was not realistic. And we had to finally arrive at a point where we convince them that this is not tenable. They shifted, and well, then again, they were more internationalistic than our perceived understanding of their policies was. No problem. We lived with that. We lived with a number of other things. We wanted to see Ethiopia allow its populations to participate in what actually means a new Ethiopia. 1991 came, Mengistu was ousted. These people began redrawing borders. Yes, within the context of federal Ethiopia and the federal constitution, they had the full right, the ultimate right, and probably the supreme right to redraw administrative boundaries. They did their best to increase or include chunks from a number of other provinces into what they conceived to be Tigray as one unique region in Ethiopia. The mistake they made was when they began redrawing international boundaries. That's where they were trapped, and that's what we call the quagmire. Now they can't get out of that quagmire, they can't extricate themselves out of the cut. They will have to find an explanation for this act of violation. Because it cannot be justified, they're living in a situation of obsession or chain reaction where a mistake is resolved or attempted to be solved by another mistake. A third mistake comes to solve the two previous mistakes. That kind of vicious circle they live.